snore is so loud. I really hope you can't hear that. Hi, I'm Sammi. I do Story Study Saturdays where I read a book and then I look at it from the perspective of a writer and see what we can learn as writers from the things that have already been written. This week, I'm so excited because I am doing 100 Days of Sunlight by Abbie Emmons. And why does that matter? Do we know who that is? You might, because she is fantastic. And I am like a super big fan of her YouTube content, and she's kind of an inspiration for me coming to YouTube and doing this on YouTube, because I always thought that writers had to like run blogs and nobody really wants to watch videos about people talking about writing. But she's been doing it for a few years, and this is her debut novel, and I read it because I'm a fan of her, and I wanted to see if her writing was as good as I think her content is. I'm gonna be as honest as I can while I'm going through it, because if somebody were to read my book and they had a platform similar to mine, I would want the genuine feedback. So I'm gonna give my genuine feedback. What is 100 Days of Sunlight? It is a contemporary YA novel about two characters falling in love because of unjust circumstances. To not give spoilers, that's what it is. And I gave it a 5 stars on my Goodreads account because when I had finished reading it, I was like, this was a great book. I'm so happy I read it. I'm so happy that I read this book that like right now I've got so much dopamine that I am having a story depression afterwards once I finished it. Literally was sad for 2 days. Had to watch a movie that was good afterwards to feel better about it. Like, it literally depressed me that I was finished with the story, and I read it so fast. So I immediately gave it 5 stars because that was my initial reaction. Then, looking at it afterwards from the perspective of somebody having read it to learn from it, I feel like I would have knocked it down a little bit, but my genuine first thoughts from reading from a reader's perspective was that I loved it. So I'm going to stick with that. I loved it. There are things that I would change, but it is, of course, a debut novel. Everybody's going to have feedback on their first book. And she self-published it, so it didn't go through as many like aggressive rounds of publishing critique as a traditionally published book would. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with self-publishing. I plan to self-publish, but it's just one of those things that it's like, you know, somebody's going to give you feedback in a certain way, and then other people are going to give you feedback in a different way, and it just depends on your market. So I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the book because duh, that's what we do here. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars because it was so enjoyable, because I just enjoyed reading it. And I just flew through it because the story was so engaging and the main characters were very interesting. And I liked following their development and their growth to find, what does she call it? Their story's truth. And I really liked seeing that they both had their own independent truths, their own independent wants that they thought that they wanted, and then the things that they actually learned that they needed was so different. And I really just enjoyed seeing the things that she talks about in her videos being put into action. It's a very great story, and all of her efforts that she puts into it are very noticeable in that. I absolutely love stories that alternate perspectives. It's kind of my favorite way to tell a love story, because then you get to experience both characters falling in love from both characters' perspectives, and that's the stuff that gets me going, is I just want to see them fall in love. Witnessing both perspectives is always going to be my favorite. Even like large group stories, love that. It's my favorite thing. For one, it's difficult as a writer because you have to develop the voice of multiple characters, develop their perspective, develop all of these other things, where telling a story from one perspective is very easy in comparison because you only have to worry about how the situation affects that one person. Where alternating perspectives is a little bit more work. It's a lot more interesting, in my personal opinion, because you get to interact and feel more characters. But I also think it's just a technical thing that is difficult to do. So I applaud that. I also think that there's a part of me that was like celebrating her book more than the average reader who stumbled across it would be, because I've followed, albeit a little late, I followed her journey of writing the story and developing the story and editing the story, beta reading the story and publishing the story and doing all of the work. So I know all of the heart that went into it. So I I feel like there's a part of me that gave it more power than it necessarily deserved because of knowing how much work went into the background. And like at the same time, I know there's a lot of work that goes into a lot of people's books, but it just doesn't have the same value as it does with Abbie's book, where I followed her story. And I watched the whole playlist of her doing her book, outlining her book, writing her book, all of the stuff. And I think that gave me a little bit more emotional juice into it. So who knows? Maybe someday when my book gets published, you guys will have the same zhuzh to like my book. Maybe it'll just be a good book. Maybe you'll hate it. Who knows? Please don't hate it. Something that I noticed because of Abbie's internet presence, I felt like her main character, Tessa, was a little bit of a self-insert. Like a little bit more of a self-insert than you would want with how public you are about your writing process. But I could also be totally wrong, and it could just be that her internet persona is very similar to her character's persona, which she could have developed at the same time and kind of just blended together. Where Tessa is a writer, she's a poet, she runs a blog, she's got a super organized room and very big fan of bright colors and like happiness and sunshine. And from what we see of Abbie's home in her videos, it's all very similar, and she's got a blog and she's a writer on the internet. I don't know if she writes poetry. Obviously she wrote the poetry in the book, I would assume. It's very similar. And she had a podcast episode where she was talking about like having blogger friends, and in the book Tessa has blogger friends. I just felt like I knew too much about Abbie to not see Tessa as a self-insert. But that's not a problem per se. There's nothing wrong with writing a self-insert if you do it the right way. I'm actually going to go into that on my Writing Tip Tuesday this week. Stay tuned for that, and then once it's live, I will link it up here. So to dig a little bit deeper into what I, as a writer and a fan of the channel, think could be improved, I wanted more from the narration. Abbie only writes in first person as of right now, as she has mentioned in her videos, and we alternate between her two main characters, Tessa and Weston. And Tessa is a writer, so her narration, I feel like, should be a little bit more prosy, a little bit more Jane Austen, and I get that. I get that a lot. But at the same time, Weston tells us he's not a writer, and then his writing, his narrations are very similar to Tessa's with the slightest bit of a difference. And I think that a lot of people would probably say that that slight difference to me is plenty. But knowing that Abbie emphasizes that every time you write from a different character's perspective, or you narrate from a character's perspective, or even just every book should be different because of what it is. You shouldn't be trying to write pretty prose all the time. It felt very pretty a lot of the time. And I don't know if that was very much in character for him, or if it was just that I noticed it a little bit more towards the beginning. I feel like I would be more okay with it if gradually he got more prosy. I may have to reread it just to see if that's what happens. And towards the end, I was like, why is he talking so well written? I don't know. But at some point I will reread that, and when it's not as fresh in my mind. I thought that if he were a little bit more stunted in his narration, less artistic in the way that he narrated towards the beginning, and maybe after spending more time with Tessa, the writer, it got more prosy, that would be a little bit easier to tolerate for me. But I didn't really notice much of a change, and I think that would be something that I would have noticed, and I just didn't notice that change happening. So I just kind of got bothered by it, especially after he said, "I'm not a writer," because he said that at some point. It might have been in a flashback, but those words were written for Weston to say. And then all of his narration was really well written, which is not a problem. It's just my brain doesn't like it. Something else, I would also have liked a little bit more digging into the concept of Tessa being a homeschooled character. I didn't think that was explored very much, and I feel like it's something that affects people. All the people I've known who have been homeschooled have either been like weird or super outgoing, really wanting to make friends. And I didn't get either of those from Tessa, from what we see of Tessa which I don't know if it's circumstantial or if it's just something that didn't really come across. But I didn't really see much about her that was like important that she was homeschooled, aside from the fact that she wasn't really around boys very often. Which at the same time could have been, instead of being homeschooled, maybe she went to an all-girls school and she would have had the exact same personality. I just don't know why make a character homeschooled if you're not going to delve into it a little bit more. If it's just like a tool of convenience to not have to worry about what time school starts when you're in the situation that Tessa's in, or something along those lines. It's just like one of those little things that like nobody else would care about, but because I'm a fan of her YouTube channel, I'm like, I'm gonna dig in a little bit, because I'm sure that you are down to take criticism. I liked the book a lot, but you know, I feel like there's always something that can be learned from and grow as a writer, as a reader. You can always learn something from your past projects or your books that you're reading. I thought that her main characters were really well developed, but the secondary characters, like Tessa's grandmother and Weston's friend whose name escapes me, I thought they were kind of like flat in comparison. They felt more like tools than they felt like people to the plot. Well, at the same time, there were times that they felt like people, but more often I was like, well, this is just dialogue for the force of the story. Okay, did he need to be here? No. We could have had an inner monologue. We could have had just like an internal debate, but we have the friend, because the friend is a catalyst to making decisions. And I think if you just spent a little bit more time developing what those characters' purposes are in their portion of the story, I guess I will take the grandmother out. She had enough agency in and of herself, perhaps the grandfather more so, that they just were sort of there to push the story, push the characters into recognizing something. It just didn't feel like they had much of their own agency, which is something that I know she's talked about in a video, and like making sure that your characters are all working towards something. And I don't know what Weston's friend was working towards, to the point that I don't even remember his name. They just needed a little bit of something. They just needed a little bit more spice, a little bit more character traits, because his friend was pretty much the only character trait that I took away from him, was pretty much just that he's like more mature and he has a face that looks like an adult sometimes. He makes adult faces. But like I said, I loved this book. There's so much great about it, and I only have a few qualms about it because of what I know Abbie does aside from writing. Is she talks about writing to other writers, and she teaches writing, and she has a whole community of writers that she works with and talks to and has live streams and answers people's questions, and she's an authority on these things, and I feel like she just fell behind a little bit. And I don't know if that's because of where she was in her establishing herself as an authority on writing while she was writing, or if it's just something that got overlooked because of perhaps the people she chose as beta readers, or the process that she was writing in, or even just my own personal taste on the story. Could be that I haven't read a YA contemporary romance in a while, which, I mean, I have, but I've also been reading a lot more fantasy lately to do research for my book. It's a very fun book. I will read it again. And I don't read books over again very often, and I will be reading this one again because I'm sure I missed something. I'm sure that there is more that I can get from it because of the external content along with it. I'm honestly sad that I got the ebook version because I know her cover is really great, and I didn't get to look at her cover very often because I didn't have the book to didn't have the book to see the cover, and like every time I put it down, I get to see the cover, and I know that her cover is really great. And I wanted to like look at the cover, and like when I got the inside jokes that were doodled on the cover, be like, ha, but I got the ebook version because I always get the ebook version. It's just got so much good going for it. The parallels that she creates between the past and the present are really fantastic, really amazing to watch how they impact the scene before and the scene after, and how the time difference created the people that you see right now, and all of that is really just great. And like the whole time I cried a couple of times, and I don't really react outwardly. Like I keep it internal most of the time when I'm like watching a show or a video or reading a book. I usually don't outwardly react. There was a lot of great control over the craft in this book, and there were only a few things that I had qualms with. I think that's an overall pretty great thing. And obviously I gave it 5 stars because it was a blast to read. I'm really hoping that she watches this video and is like, thanks, because I gave her a review. I never write reviews on Goodreads. I wrote her a review on Goodreads, and I just, well, that went on a bit of a tangent. That's all I currently have to say on this book. That's all I got. It's just, yeah, I recommend it. You should go get it. It's got an amazing cover. Very, very, very good YA contemporary romance with a lot of emotional drama. It was great. It's great. That's all I have to say. If you learned something from this video about storytelling, that's great. Leave a like. I'm very happy that you learned something. If there's a book that you want me to study, leave a comment down below. I will check it out for sure. You may see it come up in another story studies. And then check back with me on Tuesday. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when I'm posting. And we will talk about self-inserts on Tuesday. I will see you then.